Now we're on Hey Yomid Beis, and we're studying Rav Huna. Rav Huna has a Kal Vachomer from which he derives that chuppah itself is enough to generate issues, and it's a fourth method of Kidushin. And his Kal Vachomer is based on the fact that Kesef is less profound of a kinyan than chuppah, and that he proves from Truma. And nevertheless, Kesef is Konus, so certainly Chuppah, which is a more powerful kinyan than Kesef, certainly should be Konus. And the Gemara asked the following question. As a pircha on the Kal Vachomer of Rav Huna, Uma Kesef she'eno gomer, Kesef is not gomer ishus, and the Gemara says the following. It's interesting because chuppah, as we'll see later on in the sugya, sort of stands on the shoulders of kesef. And chuppah is only meaningful to generate issues and nesuin after kesef. But we don't know that. That's classified information. At this point in the sugya, the Gemara thinks that if kesef cannot create issues, it only creates the first stage of issues, then chuppah, which completes the issues, is certainly greater than kesef. And that's the top line here on Daf Hey Yomid Beis. Chuppah shegomeres eino din shetik. Now, much more so, chuppah, which has the power to create kinyan issues gemura and be gomer the issues, and she's a full-fledged issues ish, which means that he acquires ownership in Masechet Kidushin. He's allowed to have beer with her. It means that if she dies, he yarshins her. Is Eino Din Shetikna, certainly chuppah should be a kohen. So the Gemara says, you're deriving it from kesef. I'm going to prove to you that kesef is more powerful of a kinyan than chuppah, because Mala Kesef came podim bo ekdeshus u'maser sheni. So therefore, we have an area in which kesef is meaningful and valid, and that's called pidyon hegdesh or maser sheni, and yet chuppah is not is not valid as a pidyon of hegdesh. Gemara says bia tochiach. Well, what about bia? Bia is not something that could be poda hegdesh, and yet it generates issues, and it's one of the three methods of kinyan to be mekadesh an issue with bia. So we see that it's not critical to have this extra element and power of Pedias Hegdesh. Gemara says, but my labia, you can't derive anything from bia because she can't kona biyavama. Bia has a special power parallel to the special power that we spoke about in Kesef of Pedias Hegdesh, and that bia is kona biyavama. So the Gemara says kesef yochiach. Kesef doesn't have this power to be kona biyavama, and yet it generates issues. For chazar adin, lo roizek roizev lo roizek roizeh. We had a tzad shavash abahem that if we add both kesef and bia together, then kona biyalma, and they can create issues. And not only that, bia is a kinyan for Yavama, and Kesef is a kinyan for Mammon, for Karka, or Metaltalin, whatever it might be. And Kesef is also Kona Ba'amavriya. So we have a kinyan power in Kesef and in Bia. Is Afani Avi Chuppah, Shekona Bi'alma. We know that Chuppah creates issues, after which he inherits his wife if she dies. He could be made for her nidarim as a solo effort. The Kohen Kan, and therefore it should be Kohen Kidushin. So you have Kesef and Bia that are Kohen Kidushin, that generate Kidushin. And now we're going to derive Chuppah, because Chuppah has the same common denominator that we find in Kesef and Bia, namely Kohen B'alma. So Gemara says, wait a minute, that's not a fair equation. In the case of chuppah, she doesn't have any hanoah. In the case of kesef, she gains the money. And in the case of bia, she has hanoah saguf. So there's no fair tzad hashava that should allow me to equate chuppah with kesef and bia. Shtar yochia, but shtar is mekadesh an isha. She has no hanoah from the shtar. And a shtar can be written on pachas mishava pruta, so she doesn't even benefit monetarily. She can't sell the shtar on the market. And the Gemara says, you want to derive chuppah from shtar. Mal shtar shekain motzi b'bas Yisrael. Shtar has an amazing power that it's mafkia ishus. But kesef hu bia yochichu. In kesef and bia, the other two methods of Kiddushin, there is no possibility of being mafkia ishus. He can't be mafkia ishus neither with kesef nor with bia. Because adin lo roi zek roi zeh v'lo kori zek roi zeh hatzad hashem shem konim bi'alma v'konim kan. We have in these three cases the power to be kona a kinyan, whether it's a kinyan ishus or a kinyan mamon in the case of shtar and kesef, or a kinyan yibum in the case of bia. Is there, and in all these three cases it's kona be'isha, is afani avi chuppah shekona v'alma kona kan. So we have to find some common denominator of kesef, shtar, and bia of all three that doesn't have its parallel in chuppah. Malatzad hashavah of bal korcha. Kesef is bal korcha in the case of Omevriya. In other words, if a father sells his daughter who's a ketana as an Omevriya, she is niknes be kesef, even bal korcha. She doesn't want to become an Omevriya. It doesn't matter. Shtar is kona bal korcha in the case of get. Bia is kona bal korcha in the case of yibum. But in chuppah we don't find that the power of chuppah as a kinyan is operative bal korcha. And in the Nisuin, which is chuppah, you need dasa isha. Rav Huna, who had this kal v'chomer, why isn't he impressed with this pircha? Kesef mir be'ishas lo mishkachas lo ashkan bal korcha. Yeah, it's true. In Amavriya, as a kinyan mamon, you have kesef bal korcha. But in ishus, we don't find any precedent for kesef being kona and ishus bal korcha. In order for kesef to be kona, we need daito shel isha. And therefore, we now have a perfect tzad hashava between kesef, shtar, and bia that are kona v'alma and they're kona v'ishus, and afani avi chuppah. I'll also derive chuppah from that it's kona kinyan v'alma, and therefore it should be kona v'ishus, meaning to create erusin. Omar Rova shtei tshuvas b'davar. I have two objections to Rav Huna. Number one, chad d'sholosh tanan v'arba lo tanan. According to you, Rav Huna, why did the Mishnah say Isha niknes b'shalosh drachim or Isha niknes be'arba drachim v'od? And furthermore, klum chuppah gomeres ela yedei Kidushin. You want to derive the fact that chuppah is a kinyan bi'alma. Yeah, chuppah is a kinyan bi'alma to generate nisuin and all the kinyanim that and all the implications. But that's only after Kiddushin. It means that chuppah is standing on the shoulders of Kiddushin. And therefore, I understand very well that chuppah is gomeres, but that has nothing to do with kesef, shtar, or bia. You want to derive the conclusion that from the fact that the Torah recognizes a kinyan chuppah after Kiddushin, therefore the Torah would recognize the validity of a kinyan chuppah before Kiddushin. What right do you have? Amalei Abaye says, Hodekamet sholosh tanan v'arba tanan. Tana milsa de ksiva beheja bekatani, milsa lo ksiva beheja lo katani. The three methods of Kiddushin, kesef, shtar, and bia, are all written in the Torah, and we derive it from Scripture. Chuppah has no basis in the Torah whatsoever, and the Mishnah is only mentioning the three methods of ishus, of creating ishus that are minat Torah. Now, I'm not exactly sure why the logic of Abaye justifies the omission of chuppah. I don't know. Udika Amr Klum Chuppah Gomeres Ali Dei Kiddush. The second argument of Rav. Rav Huna Nami Hochi Komer Ma Kesef Sheinu Gomer Achar Kesef Kone. It's Kone issues. It's Chuppah Shegomeres Achar Kesef Eino Din Shetikne. Rav Huna's logic, according to Abaye, is based on the following: Kesef creates the first stage of Ishus, that's called Erusin, but it cannot create Nisuin. So even if we would give 2 times Kesef, 1 time to create Erusin, and a subsequent time to create Nisuin, the second Kesef will not be valid, because you can only create Nisuin through Chuppah, not through Kesef. And nevertheless, despite the fact that Kesef could not possibly be Gomer Ishus, nevertheless, it's Kona B'Kiddushin, is Chuppah that has the power to be Gomer Ishus with Nesuin, certainly should be Kona Ishus. Tanarabana Ketsa B'Kesef, Nasan Lo Kesef O Shavah Kesef V'Yamar Lo. And now we get to the Sugi of Lashonos of Kiddushin. If he says to her one of the following 3 Lashonos, it's Vadai Kiddushin. Harei at Mekudeshes Li, Harei at Meureses Li, Harei at Li into is an Aramaic word for Isha, Harei Zu Mekudeshes. Avol, that's all because he did both the Amira and the Nesina, A plus B. Avol he Nosna V'Amra he, if she did both A and B, she gave Kesef to her husband. And she said, Hareini Mekudeshes L'cha, Hareini Moreses L'cha, Harei Li L'cha into is Eina Mekudeshes. Now, Maskefler of Papa, we have what's called here Diyukim Sosrin. From the Reisha to the Sefer, this brisa is a stira. Because from the Reisha, you get the impression that the reason why the Kiddushin is not Chal is because of a double Reusa. Number 1, she did the Nesina. Number 2, she did the Amira. But if, let's say, she did one of the two, for example, let's say he did the Nesina and she did the Amira, the implication would be that that would be valid Kiddushin. But yet, we're going to see soon that Rav Papa is going to be died from the Sefer. The Sefer tells me when the Kiddushin is not Chal is because Nasna, the Amra, she did everything from A to Z, both the Nesina and the Amira, implying that that's why she's not Mekudesh. So in the Reisha, it would seem that what you need is that he do both the Amira and the Nesina. So therefore, Taima Dinosan Huvi Omar Hu. Why is it a valid Kiddushin in the Reisha? Because of both. We could check off 2 boxes. He did the Nesina and he did the Amira. The implication is Nasan Huvi Omar He. If he did the Nesina of Kiyikach and the Amir of the Lashon Kedusha was hers, then Eina Mekudeshes, that's not valid because we need to check off both boxes. We need both his Nesina and his Amira. But Ema Sefer, the Sefer which comes to passel the Kiddushin, that's only if Aval Nasna Lo, the Omra He, she did both the Nesina and the Amira, Lo Avi Kiddushin. The implication is Taima, the Nasna He, the Omra He, she did both, the Nesina and the Amira. Implying that Nasanu, if he did the Nesina, he gave her the Kesef Kiddushin. The Amra, he and she said, Hareini Mekudeshes L'cha, then have a Kiddushin, that would be valid. So we have now Diyukim Sosrim from the Reisha to the Sefer. And the Gemara answers Reisha Dafka, Sefer Kedi Nazba. We're going to take the Brisa and we're going to divide it into 2 parts. The Reisha, the Brisa, is absolutely bedafka, which means that we're going to derive from the Reisha that if she did the Amira, then the Kiddushin is not valid. When we get to the Sefer, that's called Kedi Nazba. That's just Agav Urcha. So the Gemara says, Vitana Seifa Milsa Desasra Leila. Okay, fine. You can have Kidin Nasba if a part of a Mishnah or Brisa is superfluous and unnecessary, but there can't be something wrong and contradictory to the halacha in the Seifa. You can't say Kidin Nasba. And here we have a stira based on the Seifa, because the Seifa implies that had he done the Nesina, that would be okay, even though she did the Amira. Ella, the Gemara says, I'll reinterpret the Brisa Achikama. Nasan hu, the Amar hu. We're going back to the ratio. He did both, the Nesina and the Amira. Is Pshita Davi Kidushin. There's nothing to talk about. That's perfect Kidushin. Oh, but if, let's say, there was a change, and Nasan hu vi Amra he, and instead of his doing the Amira, she did the Amira, Nasa Kavisha Nasna he vi Amra he. And the Brisa in the Seifa is talking about a case where he did the Nesina, and yet it's as if Al Pi Din, she did the Nesina. And why is that? Because she did the Amira. And therefore the Kedusha in the Seifa is invalid. So it means that the Masechet Kidushin is made up of two parts, of the Nesina and the Amira. And the Masechet Kidushin has to be implemented by the Baal, Ki Yikach, and not by the Isha. So therefore, if we're missing any one of these two elements, whether it be the Amira or the Nesina, then we don't have a Masechet Kidushin. Now, when we learned Masechet Gittin, we had a long discussion about Amira in Gerushin. And in a case where he said, Kinsi shtar chovzeh, it's not a get unless he says, hey gitech. So we see that Amira in Gerushin is very critical. If she was sleeping, he gave her the get, she woke up, and he said to her, this is your get. It would seem here also that Amira is a critical part of Kiddushin. And we need, therefore, his Amira. If she does the Amira, then it's Kitikach. She's taking him as a husband, and he's not totally active. Iboy, same another answer to this contradiction between the Reish and the Seifa, the Brisa. Nasan hu v'yomer hu mekudeshes. There's one extreme case where it's Vadei Kedushin. He did both the Nesina and the Amir. There's another extreme case where it's Vadei not a valid Kedushin. Nasna hi v'yomer hi. She did both the Nesina and the Amira. But what about Nasan hu v'yomer hi? Sveika hi. According to the list Lishna Basri by saying that we're learning now, the case where he did the Nesina and she did the Amira is a Safek Kedushin. And the Rabbanan are going to be concerned, maybe this Kedushin is valid. One thing you see from the Sugya, that his Nesina is absolutely critical. And Lesman de Polig, there was never an issue about the requirement of his Nesina. And that's Kiyika. Whether or not, in addition to his Nesina, we need his Amira, that's a matter of suffix. But it's interesting, and this is the second point I wanted to make, that the Gemara doesn't say that it's a suffix d'oraisa. The Gemara says, Chayshinon midrabbanan. And it sounds like we would say on a d'oraisa level, Uki Gavra b'cheskas heter, and she as a pnuya has a cheskas heter liolam. And if a suffix arises, like the case that we're dealing with of Nasan hu v'yomer hi, we should leave her on her chazak and she should be muteres. And the Rabbanan in this case said, no. This is a different kind of a suffix. This is a suffix in halacha. And we have to recognize the possibility that this is a valid kedusha. Okay, now we go on in our study of the Lashonos of Kiddushin. Amar Shmuel b'Kiddushin, im nosan lo kesef v'shava kesef. V'hi amar la reat mekudeshes. What do you notice here? He left out the key word. Which word? Li. Hareat mureses. He left out li. Hareat li lintu. He left out li. We have to take out the word li. Harei zu mekudeshes. Shmuel is holding yadayim sheni mochikas avad yadayim. Hareini ishech. Hareini balech. Hareini arusech. If he says, I will be to you a husband, I will be to you an arus, ein kan beis mechush. That's not even a Safek Kiddush. B'chein b'gerishin. Shmuel says that we have an absolute parallel in gerishin. Nosan lav yomar la. Hareat mishuleches. Hareat megureshes. Hareat muteres l'chol odom hareizu megureshes. These are all valid Lashonos of gerishin. But if he says, Eini ishech, Eini balech, Eini arusech, Ein kan beis mechush. The Torah requires that he take her, and the Amir is part of the kicha. And if he says, Hareini sheikh, then that's not a kicha. And in the case of Gerishin, he has to be Magarisha. And if he says Eini sheikh, that's not Gerishin. So Hareini sheikh and Eini sheikh are not valid. Ein kan beis mechush. Even if he left out the word li, and therefore it's unclear whether he's mekadosh this woman for himself or for someone else as a shliach. Nevertheless, the kiddushin is valid because yadayim sheini mochichos haven yadayim. But Tanan, I'm going to prove based on Shmuel's comment that was appended to the Mishnah at the beginning of Nazir that Shmuel holds yadayim sheini mochichos lo haven yadayim. Homer, hey, I will be. Hareze Nazir. He didn't say he would be a Nazir. He said he will be. Maybe he'll be in a tinus. Homer Shmuel, who? When does a hey operate as a valid lashon of Kabbalas Nazirus kishahaya Nazir over lefanav? So we see that when he says a hey, and this Nazir is passing by, I will be like him, that's called Yadai Mochichos. Time of the Nazir, this Rapapa's the over Lefana. Halav Hachiv, there's no Nazir lo, because we're not sure whether he means a hey Nazir or a hey Betainis. And therefore we see that Shmuel holds that Yadayim Sheini Mochichos Lov and Yadayim, and to upgrade it to the status of Yadayim HaMochichos, we need Nazir over Lefanav. When it says Hachavayis Kina the Amarli, he said Arei at Mekudeshes Li. No, if he said Arei at Mekudeshes Li, that's a perfect language of Kiddusha. Why do I need Shmuel to tell me that she's Mekudeshes? My Kamash Malon.